You're welcome to the Economy and Politics Conversation. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will discuss repositioning Nigeria's agric sector for productivity. Joining me virtually for this conversation is Mrs. Tosin Ojo, a chartered financial analyst and partner private equity team for Sahel Capital. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Let us begin by asking, agriculture is responsible for almost a third of Nigeria's gross domestic products, but has been showing minimal growth and even more minor relevance to dollar revenues, which we really need at this time. What needs to be done to improve the outcomes?
The reality is nothing much has changed in the way we're doing agriculture, perhaps for more than 40, 50 years. It's still rain-fed, subsistence farming largely, and and there's not much that you can derive from that. You look at countries that have very solid agricultural output. There's more commercialization around agriculture. I think that's the first thing. Second is there's also not a lot that we're doing in terms of research and implementing the research to improve outcomes such as agricultural yields. Now, there's research that we are doing, but I'm saying the linkage between when the research is done, implementing the research, commercializing, implementing, and ensuring that it translates into outcomes, expected outcomes around improvement in productivity in the agriculture sector. We don't have that linkage. I think those are the two major issues. I mean, if we keep doing the same thing the same way, we can't expect a different response. In the last few years, say 5 years or more, an additional dynamic of insecurity has added, which then has put a lot of pressure around our output, and the insecurity around rural farming communities, mostly not the northern Nigeria, from north central region upwards, also has reduced farming activities in those regions where most of our farming activities occur anyways. And of course, that has had additional effects on the shocks that we have seen. But generally, nothing much has changed in the way we are doing agriculture in this country for more than 40 years, and I've probably been in a conservative way, saying 40 years. Still, subsistence farming, rain-fed, nothing much has changed. So.
Well, very clear there's need for change, especially commercial agriculture, and of course the linkage with research, which is very important, but very clear insights from you, Mrs. Ojo. Now, when we look at the Nigerian smallholder farmers, we've seen several research work on the need to strengthen what they're doing, but they're finding it difficult to improve the output per land use, which is a challenge too. And this is despite the fact we've seen several billions committed to the sector in the recent past. We've seen several interventions in the past, even from development financing activities of the central bank. So the big question is, why is the industry still stumbling despite various interventions, whether it's international financing, whether it's development financing from central bank, whether it's even financing from federal government?
The reality is, when we say there's financing, we need to go do attribution to see what is the money, what is the money, right? We know, for example, some of the funding from, for example, the central bank, like intervention from the sector, ended up causing a lot of dislocation, because then you have a lot of people who really are not farmers or processors who then took advantage of that. One of the things you also need to be careful of is when you're doing interventions that clearly we have market dislocations, how you implement them are very important, because you create incentives for people for sharp practices. And that's what we're saying. So of all the funding you've talked about, if you really go on dimension and do attribution, you can really, I don't have the data, but the reality is that, for example, we had even when the Akobora scheme and CBN has scrapped it. The reality is that not much really gets to where it is intended or where it is needed. So that's the first issue. So I think financing organizations, personally, I don't think entities like CBN have a business in providing intervention funds in agriculture. You can have the funding, but you need to figure out the right implementing partners, the right mechanism that makes you remote from the implementation, and you need to put in mechanisms that aligns the incentives of the implementing partners or the fund managers with the outcomes that you expect from that program, because incentives shape behavior. Once you delineate the incentives for those managers to the outcomes you expect from the behavior, then you give room for a lot of unscrupulous and sharp practices. So I think that's the other thing. So when I say implementing partners, it's easy to just say commercial banks. The reality is that commercial banks would barely fund agriculture. We've blocked that for too long. They are not set up to fund agriculture because the kind of risk that agriculture and agribusiness entail, the nature of the short-term funding of many commercial banks cannot allow them to fund it. Part of why it will not also allow them is that they need very strong depth of expertise, because there's a compounding effect of knowledge. The stronger the expertise you have, the more you understand what to structure, how to mitigate risk and all of that. But they don't have that room. There's so many other competing priorities that they have. So designing all of these, making them implementing partners, and then the incentives are not just, and then the projects, whatever they have incentives are, it's not tied to outcomes, right? So you need like proper impact investors that are specialists in the sector, to be able to implement that. So I've digressed a little bit. So the point is, yes, there's a lot of billions. When you do an attribution, where did the money go? Really, not a lot has gone into the sector per se. And part of that is a fault across from everybody, from the design of those intervention funds in themselves. Like I said, when you have intervention funds that will cause market dislocation because there are some forms of subsidies, you create needs, sharp practices, it's human behavior. There's nothing you can do about that. So in the design, in how you design the funds and how you implement it, is extremely important that you put in incentives that tie people's behavior, that ties people's economic gain to outcomes that you expect to get from that particular intervention, as opposed to what we have seen in the past.
That's where we have the likes of Sahel Capital and the rest. But quickly, before we get to our next question, I want to ask you about the Bank of Agriculture. Recapitalizing it, will that really also help to begin to address those issues of the dislocations? Would it have that design structure where it addresses those dislocations and we see real-time interventions that have really impact agriculture?
Yes, it can help. It can help. I think everywhere in the world, like there's certain kinds of, let's say, subsidies and special considerations that agriculture has everywhere. So I think it can help. It's a good step. The issue is not always, especially in the Nigerian context, it's not always in the design. It's not always in like the recapitalization stuff like that. It's the implementation of the design. First, the design itself and implementation. And most times. And we need to face a reality in this country, and that's the fact that there are a lot of bad actors. There are a lot of bad actors, public sector, private sector. There are a lot of bad actors, and people don't hold themselves to very high standards around ethics. Because there are a lot of bad actors, when you're designing, so when you recapitalize the bank of culture, for example, I think the focus should be then providing risk guarantees, providing downside protection to private sector entities, such that those ones can then fund agriculture. And it could be banks, it could be alternative asset managers like ourselves as Sahel Capital. I think that should be the focus. Once you have a big wholesale institution like that, government-owned entity, regulated, wanting to do financing in the same way that the banks or financial institutions would do, then again, you start messing up with incentives, you start messing up with the system, right? Because everyone then looks for who they know in that system to get cheap funds and not necessarily put it in our culture. But if what you're doing is that you are enabling the system. People who already have the incentive to lend to that sector anyways, because that's their own work. And that's where their own income is going to come from. Yeah. And you enable them to de-risk it in such a way that they can then serve more people. And then, yes, you've really designed it in a way that is going to have the intended effect and you minimize on the intended effect. So we need to move away from this whole government institution doling out money. It's never really worked. And it's very simple. We need to face ourselves in this country. A lot of Nigerians are bad actors. Yeah. And when the opportunity is there, they take advantage of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're very clear. Risk guarantees, downside protection, so that investors can really come in and really do what they have to do to lift the sector. Very critical sector that can diversify our revenue sources and further deepen growth in the economy. Analysts, of course, believe, like you rightly said earlier, that we need to have research and development. Recently, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, also talked about the need for Nigeria to focus on investing in research and development to unlock the agric sector. This will go a long way, according to enhance the growth and development of the sector. For private equity firms, for investors, for key players like you and the rest, how are you navigating the issue of research, linking it with taking those real-time investment decisions? And what are those gaps that needs to be addressed in this regard? We have several research institutes in the country. We have agric universities, but we need to begin to see the value linking with policies and boosting agricultural productivity.
The reality is that agriculture is a sector that is highly tied to boost productivity, is highly tied to your research capabilities. And research really needs, if there's a place, I've talked about government moving away from providing direct funding, or if there's a place that government is needed, both in terms of their ability to assess, mobilize, funding for research, the ability to convene ecosystem players and actors. It's in research. That's when government is needed. Where if they put some money around research, that money can, for every dollar, they have access to additional funding from multilateral organizations, so that the research, so that we can really have significant research funding beyond what we can finance ourselves. But if there's a place where you really need government, you need government there. Another reason why you need government is that research, again, you don't see the commercial returns immediately. So you would not find private sector entities funding research. It's too early, and the risk, that's why it's research. You have to do a lot of trials before you even figure out what works and what doesn't work. And in that period, you burn money, you burn resources. So you don't have investors going that early. It's too early. So you need government, you need grants, you need from development organizations. Government can help, catalyze more funding to that research. Now, but there's a problem that we have generally in Nigeria, not just in the agriculture sector. Our higher institutions of learning and research institutes are doing research for the sake of research. They're doing research for the sake of writing paper and doing something theoretical. There's a huge breakage, if I can use that word, between them and industry and private sector, where research should be commercialized. Now, if your research is not useful for a commercialization purpose, it's just an academic exercise. The idea should be you take the research, solve the problem, and even if it can't be immediately commercialized, there should be pathway that one can see commercialization. So there's a break.
Commercialization.
There's a delinking in that regard, and that's part of the challenge. We are back to our agribusiness sector. One of the areas where we need critical research to be going on is around seeds. We need seeds that are better adapted to this environment because of the realities of climate change.
Yes.
We need flood resistant seeds. We need heat resistant seeds. We need genetics in livestock space. We need genetics that are better resistant. Genetics that are better suited to this environment. There's one area where you cannot go and do research in Europe or do trials in Europe and bring the seed here. You need to do the research here, you need to do the trials here, and then you need to find institutions that can commercialize it. But the last part of the problem is that the linkage has to be complete. When you want to commercialize, who will buy? Most of the farming that's happening in Nigeria are done by smallholder farmers. They don't see the value of improved seeds, for example. And so until we're able to complete the loop to see where the returns will really come from, then it's difficult to then even continue to say, take research, commercialize, or even to keep pushing money to research. So those are some of the things that we've had. There's been a lot of dislocations and breakages in things that really should be well linked.
Again, you've talked about linkage between research, commercialization, and addressing those breakages. Those things are dislocating everything. I know the commodities exchange also play a very critical role here. From your experience in agribusiness, what are those infrastructure constraints that need urgent attention to boost productivity of the sector in the economy? I mean, something that the Minister of Agriculture and every critical player in the policy space for agriculture should address in this year to ensure that we see productivity in the sector.
I think if we really want to focus on short-term stuff that improve productivity, the easiest thing is to have irrigation. We need to go and revitalize a lot of those the irrigation assets that are owned by the government. The river basins, some of those river basins, we don't even have
River Basin Authorities,
them to farmlands, right? To connect them to farmlands, and then the farmers don't have access to, funding to be able to, for example, connect themselves to irrigation, to be able to use irrigation, like, for example, pumps and things like that, sprinklers, pumps, things like that. If you really want to easy, low-hanging fruit, because we can then do 2 seasons in certain crops instead of relying on 1 season and doing rain-fed farming. That way, the second thing we need to do is we need to fix the infrastructure around storage, so that even if we do 2 seasons, you know that there is enough room to store, and you will not have to a lot of post-harvest losses or waste, because you can't store. But those are easy hanging fruits. If we say one, we pick irrigation, pick 1 crop. There's no need to, or 2. There's no need to try and stretch 2 things. Pick a maize, pick another maybe 4-month crop that you can easily crop in a 2-cycle period if irrigation is there, other seeds and other things are there, and focus on that. And look for partners who already have very strong linkages with those farmers. People who provide extension services, people who provide aggregators that work with them directly, and partner with those. And again, tie incentives to outcome. We don't incentive shape behavior. We behave anyhow in this country because the incentives are not tied to the things, to outcomes, to economic gain or loss, and therefore people can behave anyhow. So tie incentives to outcomes. And then once you're able to do that, those are low-hanging fruits and improve productivity.
We'll continue to have this conversation with you, but thank you very much, Mrs. Tosin Ojo, Chartered Financial Analyst and partner, private equity fund for the Sahel Capital. Thank you very much for taking out this time to discuss with us around repositioning agriculture to drive productivity in Nigeria. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. To our viewers, if you want to get further insights on this conversation, visit the ProShare website displayed on the screen and follow our social media platforms to engage further. Until you come your way again, enrich yourself with knowledge of socioeconomic developments around you. It is wise. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.